This tiny life was the secret I guarded with everything I had. The man who discarded me over a fabricated medical lie was the exact same person forced to deliver his own flesh and blood during a massive blizzard. His absolute pride as a prestigious doctor shattered the second he saw the face of this child. Elite power games tore my family apart, but I will be the one burying their legacy forever. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Violet Jenkins. The city of Oakhaven was drowning under the most merciless blizzard we had witnessed in over 30 years. The sky was an unforgiving sheet of black ice, and the streets were completely buried beneath several feet of snow. I was sitting at my desk inside the massive, quiet office of Viridian Dynamics Logistics. It was well past 9 o'clock in the evening. I was completely alone, except for my best friend Clara, who was furiously typing away at the desk across from mine. We were trying to finalize a critical shipping data audit before the severe storm completely shut down the city power grid. I reached for my ceramic coffee mug, and that was exactly when the very first wave hit me. It was not a dull ache. It was a vicious, tearing agony that ripped straight through my lower abdomen, feeling as if a heavy serrated blade was being dragged across my insides. I let out a sharp, sudden gasp, my fingers gripping the edge of my solid oak desk so hard that my fingernails felt like they would snap in half. A sudden, warm rush of fluid soaked entirely through my thick woolen skirt and rapidly pooled onto the cold office floor. My water had broken. Weeks ahead of the scheduled due date, Clara was out of her chair in a fraction of a single second. She did not panic or hesitate. She threw my heavy winter coat over my shivering shoulders, slung her strong arm tightly around my waist, and practically carried my dead weight out of the empty corporate building. The freezing wind hit us like a massive physical blow the moment we stepped outside into the dark. The city was utterly paralyzed, reduced to a freezing white wasteland. Clara shoved me into the passenger seat of her rugged 4x4 truck and slammed her heavy boot onto the gas pedal. The agonizing drive was a living nightmare. Every minor bump on the snow-packed roads sent terrible shockwaves of blinding pain shooting directly up my spine. Clara navigated completely blindly through the dense whiteout, sliding dangerously on hidden black ice and dodging abandoned passenger vehicles left in the middle of the road. We finally skidded to a violent halt right in front of the brightly lit emergency room of the single operating hospital left functioning in the entire district. The sheer chaos inside the building was overwhelming. Overworked medical staff rushed past us in every direction, loudly shouting orders. But Clara screamed far louder than all of them until a frantic nurse quickly brought a metal wheelchair. They rushed me straight down the long corridors and pushed me into the delivery ward. The blinding white fluorescent lights positioned above stabbed directly into my exhausted eyes. The air inside the room smelled strongly of sterile alcohol and raw human fear. For what felt like 5 excruciating hours, I was completely trapped in a relentless, unforgiving cycle of torture. The continuous, rapid beeping of the electronic heart monitor was the only solid anchor keeping my mind tied to reality. Every new contraction felt like my pelvic bones were being actively crushed inside a heavy iron vise. My breathing came in ragged, shallow gasps. My trembling fingers dug so fiercely into the cold metal safety rails of the hospital bed that my tight knuckles turned completely white. I was fully drenched in cold sweat, my physical energy completely drained, hanging onto consciousness by a microscopic thread of sheer willpower. Then, the heavy wooden delivery room doors flew open with a violent thud. A tall male figure rushed inside, fully dressed in blue surgical scrubs, hastily adjusting a pair of tight latex gloves. Because of the terrible winter storm, the entire hospital was severely understaffed. He was the only chief resident doctor left standing on the night shift in the maternity ward. I forced my heavy, tear-soaked eyelids open, squinting hard through the blurry haze of my own intense pain. My beating heart completely stopped. The thin air vanished entirely from my lungs. It was Arthur Sterling. Arthur froze instantly in the dead center of the bright room. It was exactly as if he had slammed his body into an invisible brick wall. The warm color drained from his handsome face in a split second, leaving his clear skin much paler than the suffocating snowstorm raging outside the windows. The heavy metal medical clipboard he held slipped right through his suddenly numb fingers. It crashed violently onto the hard ceramic tile floor, the sharp, clattering noise echoing loudly like a fired gunshot over the steady, rhythmic beeping of the vital monitors. His dark eyes grew impossibly wide, filled rapidly with an absolute raw terror. He was staring directly at my face. He was looking straight down at the ex-wife he had so cruelly discarded 3 years ago, the loyal woman he had thrown away like worthless trash because he blindly believed a sickening medical lie. And right now, that exact same woman was lying highly vulnerable, completely stripped of her daily armor, writhing in the agonizing final stages of labor right on his own delivery table. Complete panic paralyzed him entirely. He was visibly shaking from head to toe, completely unable to form a single coherent word or take a single step forward, but I simply did not have the luxury of processing this shock. Another monstrous, rolling contraction hit my body, tearing a guttural, animalistic scream straight from my burning, dry throat. I summoned every final ounce of raw strength remaining in my shattered, battered body. I locked my furious, burning eyes onto his terrified face, absolutely refusing to let him look away from the damage he helped cause. "Do your job, Arthur!" I growled loudly, my tired voice rough and commanding despite the overwhelming agony. "Do not just stand there like a coward. You are a medical doctor. Act like one and deliver this baby right now." My harsh, demanding command shattered his frozen trance. His deeply ingrained medical instincts violently overrode his intense personal panic. He rushed forward to the end of the bed, his shaking hands moving mechanically, desperately trying to catch up with the situation. He barked urgent medical orders at the 2 assisting nurses. I pushed forward. I pushed with absolutely everything I had left inside my soul, channeling years of silent suffering, bitter betrayal, and boiling hot rage into one final, explosive physical effort. The intense pain reached a blinding, agonizing peak. The entire world faded to black around the edges of my vision, and then a sharp, piercing baby cry tore fiercely through the tense, suffocating silence of the delivery room. My chest heaved violently up and down as I collapsed heavily back onto the soaked white pillows, desperately gasping for clean air. Arthur was carefully holding the screaming baby boy in his gloved hands. He began to gently wipe the newborn skin down with a towel. But suddenly, the heavy breath hitched audibly deep in his throat. He stopped moving his hands entirely. The busy room went completely still and silent. Arthur's terrified eyes were permanently glued to the baby's tiny left shoulder. There, perfectly stamped on the pale, delicate skin of the fragile infant, was a highly distinct crescent moon birthmark. It was the exact same, completely unmistakable birthmark that every single blood descendant of the wealthy Sterling family carried. It was a genetic signature that could never be faked or denied by anyone. Arthur looked exactly like a guilty man who had just been forcefully condemned to a terrible death. His large hands trembled violently as he held the tiny, crying newborn close to his chest. He slowly lifted his heavy head and looked directly at my face. His dark eyes were wild, completely broken, and filled with a devastating, crushing realization. "Violet," he whispered quietly, his weak voice cracking with a desperate, fearful tremor. "Is he mine? Is this child my son?" I did not shed a single tear for him. I did not flinch or look away. I did not offer him even a single ounce of comfort or closure. I simply stared right back at his pathetic face with cold, piercing eyes. My silent response was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy silence that loudly answered everything, forever sealing his tragic fate in that very hospital room. The agonizing reality of that freezing delivery room felt like a twisted echo of a life I had buried. To truly understand the devastating weight of Arthur's broken expression, one must travel back precisely 3 years into the past. Back then, we lived together in the sprawling, oppressive Sterling family estate. The mansion was a colossal structure of cold marble and dark mahogany, but to me, it was nothing more than an elegant, suffocating prison. The air inside those walls always felt noticeably thinner, actively consumed by the heavy expectations of elite society and the dictatorial control of my mother-in-law, Beatrice Sterling. Beatrice ruled the household like a ruthless, reigning monarch. She possessed a terrifying ability to smile warmly while simultaneously plunging a verbal dagger straight into my back. From the very first day of our marriage, she made it perfectly clear that my working-class background was a repulsive stain on her pristine family tree. She never missed a single opportunity to mock my origins. She would sip her expensive afternoon tea, look at me with deeply refined venom, and loudly ask, "Tell me, Violet, does your family still purchase their clothing from those dreadful wholesale discount warehouses?" But her true dark obsession, the daily demand that echoed constantly through the endless hallways, was the immediate production of a male heir. She needed a grandson to secure the vast family wealth, and every single month that passed without a pregnancy felt like a deeply personal, deliberate insult to her elite lineage. As the first year of marriage dragged on without a child, the pressure mutated into a psychological torture. Under the sickly sweet guise of deep maternal concern, Beatrice finally intervened. She insisted that I visit a highly exclusive, privately owned fertility clinic located in the wealthiest district of the city. She assured me she only wanted the best, specifically choosing a facility entirely owned and operated by one of her closest, lifelong friends. I vividly remember the plush leather couches in the waiting room, the soft, deceptive classical music playing from hidden speakers, and the endless, grueling series of highly invasive reproductive examinations. I was poked, prodded, and subjected to dozens of exhausting blood draws over several agonizing weeks. Then came the dreadful afternoon of the final consultation. The head doctor sat perfectly rigid behind a massive wooden desk, her sharp features completely devoid of any genuine human empathy. She did not even bother to look me directly in the eyes when she delivered the crushing verdict. She coldly stated that my complex test results indicated severe premature ovarian failure. She told me, in a flat, heavily clinical tone, that my body was entirely incapable of producing viable eggs. According to her absolute, final medical opinion, there was a 0% chance of recovery. I would permanently and entirely be unable to ever conceive a child of my own. Those cruel words hit me like a devastating physical blow to the chest. A deep, bottomless crater opened up entirely inside my soul. I was violently plunged into an absolute, suffocating darkness of despair and intense self-blame. I felt utterly broken, like a severely defective machine entirely unworthy of love, belonging, or a family. I spent countless nights crying silently into my pillows until my eyes swelled completely shut, mourning the beautiful ghost of a child I deeply believed I would never be allowed to hold. In my darkest, most desperate hour, I looked entirely to my husband for salvation. Arthur was a brilliant, highly respected physician. He had the vast medical knowledge, the professional resources, and the clear ability to help me fight this diagnosis. I begged him to seek second opinions, to personally review my confusing medical charts, but he did absolutely nothing. Instead of fighting for our future together, he cowardly backed away. Despite his own medical expertise, he spinelessly accepted his colleague's devastating diagnosis as absolute gospel. He completely trusted his mother's carefully curated narrative over his own wife's desperate, tearful pleas. He never once bothered to run a single independent health check on me. He simply withdrew, brick by brick, building an impenetrable, freezing wall of icy silence between us. The final months of our marriage were a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 paper cuts. The psychological isolation was absolute and terrifying. Arthur began working extremely late hours, deliberately sleeping in the guest bedroom, entirely unable to even look at me without a thinly veiled expression of deep disappointment. Meanwhile, Beatrice ruthlessly intensified her daily psychological warfare. Every single family dinner became a toxic battlefield where she would casually mention the booming birth rates of their wealthy friends or loudly lament the tragic, pathetic end of the Sterling bloodline right in front of my face. Her cruel, relentless daily taunts slowly and methodically poisoned whatever tiny, fragile fragments of affection Arthur still held for me in his heart. The unbearable, unfeeling coldness of my husband, combined with the crushing, continuous torment from my mother-in-law, eventually strangled our marriage until it stopped breathing entirely. The devastating culmination of this carefully orchestrated misery arrived on a freezing winter morning. I walked into the grand dining room and found a thick stack of pristine legal documents waiting quietly on the polished wooden table. They were the divorce papers, placed there without a single word of explanation, acting as the final, brutal signature on the death certificate of my shattered life. The sharp strike of the judge's wooden gavel echoed loudly through the cavernous courtroom, sounding exactly like the final nail being violently driven into the coffin of my marriage. It was a bleak Tuesday morning. I had just signed away my entire future with Arthur, reducing several years of shared history to a few sterile strokes of black ink on a legal document. The massive marble corridors of the courthouse were completely empty and painfully cold as Clara and I walked slowly toward the heavy glass exit doors. Suddenly, I felt an intense, overwhelming wave of pure exhaustion wash violently over my body. The solid stone floor beneath my feet seemed to tilt sharply. A vicious surge of severe nausea twisted my stomach into extremely tight knots. The bright ceiling lights blurred into a blinding white streak, and before Clara could even reach out her strong hand to catch my arm, my knees buckled entirely. I collapsed heavily onto the hard, polished stone floor, plunging deeply into complete darkness. When I finally forced my heavy eyelids open, the harsh, sterile smell of medical antiseptic immediately assaulted my senses. However, this was not the familiar, terrifying scent of the fertility clinic from my traumatic past. Clara had rushed me away from the courthouse to a completely independent, highly secured private hospital located on the exact opposite side of the city. I was lying quietly in a warmly lit examination room. A gentle, elderly doctor walked slowly through the doorway, holding a crisp white medical chart in his hands. He adjusted his silver glasses, offering me a highly reassuring, warm smile that instantly confused my panicked mind. "Miss Jenkins," he began in a calm, incredibly steady voice, "your physical collapse today was simply the direct result of severe dehydration and acute, prolonged emotional stress. However, we ran a standard, comprehensive blood panel just to be absolutely certain of your overall physical condition. I have some highly unexpected news for you." He paused for a single, agonizing second before speaking the specific words that would fundamentally alter the entire trajectory of my existence. "You are exactly 10 weeks pregnant. The fetus is perfectly healthy and developing completely normally." The entire room started spinning all over again. The thin air vanished completely from my tight lungs. I stared directly at his face with wide, completely disbelieving eyes, my trembling hands instinctively flying up to cover my open mouth. He reached out and handed me a glossy black and white ultrasound photograph. There, right in the dead center of the dark frame, was a tiny, absolutely undeniable cluster of living cells, a rapid heartbeat, a real, living child. Hot, completely uncontrollable tears of absolute, pure joy cascaded rapidly down my pale cheeks. I was actually going to be a mother. The impossible, beautiful miracle I had desperately begged for every single night had silently taken root deep inside my body. But exactly as the overwhelming wave of pure euphoria washed over my wounded soul, a freezing, absolutely terrifying realization crashed forcefully into my racing brain. I stared intensely at the tiny image resting securely in my shaking hands. If I was pregnant right now, and my physical body was perfectly capable of naturally carrying a healthy child, then the previous medical diagnosis was an absolute, entirely fabricated lie. The severe premature ovarian failure, the deeply devastating medical verdict declaring that I possessed exactly 0 viable eggs, the entire sickening narrative that systematically destroyed my marriage. It was all a meticulously constructed, highly expensive fiction. My immense, crippling grief instantly hardened into a sharp, burning fury. I forcefully wiped the wet tears from my face. My previous, pathetic despair vanished entirely, replaced instantly by the cold, highly calculating instincts of a cornered predator desperately protecting her young. The very next morning, I arrived at the Viridian Dynamics Logistics office several hours before my regular corporate shift. As a senior data auditor, my daily professional job involved tracking highly complex, deeply buried financial discrepancies across massive global supply chains. I possessed the exact technical skills required to follow a digital paper trail straight to hell and back. I securely locked my heavy office door, skillfully bypassed the standard corporate security protocols, and began a highly illegal, incredibly deep dive into the financial records of the supposedly prestigious fertility clinic. It took me exactly 4 hours of relentless, intensely focused digital searching to completely shatter the heavy firewall protecting their private accounting system. What I finally discovered, hiding deep inside those highly encrypted servers, made my blood run completely cold. There was a highly sophisticated, deeply hidden network of massive financial transfers flowing directly from Beatrice Sterling's private offshore bank accounts straight into the personal, secured trust fund of the head doctor who had falsely diagnosed me. The specific dates of the enormous wire transfers aligned perfectly with every single one of my major medical appointments. Beatrice had paid an absolute fortune to purchase a fake medical tragedy. She had successfully orchestrated a despicable, completely ruthless theatrical play to forcibly rip me entirely out of Arthur's life. As I dug even deeper into the intercepted digital communications, the final, disgusting piece of her sickening puzzle fell perfectly into place. I found multiple, highly detailed email exchanges between Beatrice and a highly exclusive, extremely expensive event planner. They were already aggressively coordinating an extravagant engagement party. The intended bride was Eleanor, a highly arrogant, extremely wealthy female heiress to a massive pharmaceutical empire. Beatrice never merely wanted a grandchild. She deeply desired a lucrative corporate merger, and she brutally slaughtered my marriage just to completely clear the path for her boundless, greedy ambitions. I sat completely alone in the dim, quiet glow of my computer monitors, my beating heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my chest. The old Violet would have immediately run straight to Arthur, desperately waving these printed documents right in his face, loudly begging him to finally see the monstrous truth about his own mother. But the new Violet, the fiercely protective mother holding a fragile 10-week-old secret, knew significantly better. Arthur had already proven his absolute cowardice. He deliberately chose to blindly trust a forged piece of paper over the loyal woman he once vowed to love. If I foolishly revealed the secret pregnancy right now, the incredibly wealthy and powerful Sterling family would immediately deploy their ruthless army of corporate lawyers to violently tear my child away from my arms. I carefully, methodically, deleted every single remaining trace of my digital search history. I made a silent, completely unbreakable vow right there in the empty, silent office. I would not say a single word to anyone. I would disappear entirely into the shadows, permanently severing every single tie to Arthur Sterling and his highly venomous family. I would silently build an impenetrable fortress around my unborn child, and I would patiently wait for the exact perfect moment to burn their entire legacy straight to the ground. The subsequent months of my solitary pregnancy were an agonizing test of absolute human endurance. Surviving in complete shadows demanded a brutal, exhausting toll on my physical body. The morning sickness from the early weeks aggressively mutated into severe, relentless physical pain that radiated deep within my lower back and joints. There were countless nights when the severe leg cramps and the crushing weight of the growing child left me entirely paralyzed on the cold bathroom floor, desperately gasping for a single breath of air. My energy was completely drained, systematically siphoned away by the immense biological effort of growing a new life entirely on my own. Through this dark, agonizing tunnel, Clara became my absolute, unshakable pillar of survival. She meticulously orchestrated my complete disappearance from the city grid. She successfully located a highly isolated, heavily weathered rental cabin situated deep within a quiet, forgotten residential suburb located roughly 40 miles completely outside the city limits. It was a bleak, silent neighborhood where neighbors actively avoided eye contact and asked absolutely zero questions. Clara personally handled every single one of my highly secretive medical appointments, deliberately registering me under a carefully constructed fake alias at a small rural clinic. She brought me fresh groceries every single Sunday, paying entirely in cash to ensure my physical location remained an impenetrable fortress. While my fragile body rested in the quiet shadows, my mind transformed into a highly weaponized, calculating machine. The digital footprints I had discovered at the corporate office were merely the beginning. I needed absolute, undeniable physical proof that would hold up under the brutal scrutiny of a federal courtroom. I deliberately liquidated a massive portion of my personal life savings, withdrawing exactly $50,000 in untraceable cash, to permanently retain the services of an incredibly ruthless, highly discreet private investigator for exactly 6 solid months. My hired operative silently tracked every single movement Beatrice Sterling made. He was exceptionally thorough. Through a series of highly complex, covert operations, he successfully extracted the official, certified bank statements that definitively proved the massive financial bribery. But his crowning achievement arrived in the form of a heavily encrypted digital drive delivered directly to my cabin door. It contained crystal-clear security camera footage showing Beatrice physically sitting inside an upscale, incredibly private dining room with the corrupted head doctor. The high-definition video clearly captured my former mother-in-law casually sliding a thick, heavy envelope across the table, sealing my tragic medical fate over a plate of expensive caviar. Armed with this highly explosive, irrefutable mountain of evidence, I aggressively moved to fortify my legal defenses. I scheduled highly confidential, late-night meetings with the most vicious, highly successful family law attorney operating within the state. Together, we meticulously constructed a massive, completely impenetrable legal barricade. We preemptively drafted incredibly aggressive custody filings, explicitly detailing the severe medical fraud and extreme psychological abuse inflicted by the Sterling family. We ensured that the very exact second my child took his first breath of air, the state law would grant me 100% sole physical and legal custody. Arthur would possess absolutely zero parental rights. He would be entirely legally blocked from ever approaching my son. As I sat alone in my dark, quiet living room, reviewing the massive stacks of legal documents, a breaking news alert flashed brightly across my television screen. The local society channels were breathlessly reporting on the upcoming, incredibly extravagant high society event of the entire decade. Arthur was officially preparing to host a massive, highly publicized engagement gala with Eleanor. The television anchor loudly boasted that the lavish celebration was being entirely funded by the highly prestigious Sterling Family Medical Foundation, a supposedly charitable trust fundamentally designed to assist vulnerable sick children. The sickening, twisted irony of using a pediatric charity to publicly celebrate a marriage built entirely on the deliberate, malicious destruction of my own fertility made my stomach churn violently. A blinding, hot flash of pure rage violently threatened to consume my mind. The old, deeply wounded part of my soul desperately wanted to storm directly into their wealthy estate right then and there, aggressively throwing the damning photographs directly into their arrogant, smiling faces. But I deliberately forced my racing heartbeat to slow down. I took a deep, highly controlled breath of the cold cabin air. Placing my hands gently over my heavily swollen stomach, I maintained an absolutely cold, completely calculating mindset. The physical safety of my unborn child was my absolute, singular priority. A premature strike would easily allow the highly powerful Sterling family to manipulate the media narrative and brutally attack me in court. I needed to wait. I needed to be terrifyingly patient. I would sit quietly in the dark, carefully sharpening my weapons, and calmly wait for the exact perfect moment to deliver the absolute, fatal blow. The intense, suffocating silence of my private recovery room was violently shattered exactly 2 hours after my grueling delivery. I was lying rigidly on the narrow, uncomfortable hospital bed, my exhausted body hooked up to a continuous saline drip, while my beautiful baby boy slept safely in the clear plastic bassinet beside me. Suddenly, angry, shouting voices echoed loudly from the sterile hallway. I recognized the arrogant, demanding tone instantly. Arthur was aggressively using his senior medical authority to completely bypass the strict hospital visitation protocols. I could hear a terrified young nurse weakly attempting to block his path, nervously explaining that I needed absolute rest, but he ruthlessly overrode her entirely. The heavy wooden door flew open with a violent crash. Arthur stormed directly into the dimly lit room. He had removed his blood-stained surgical scrubs and was now wearing a crisp, perfectly tailored white doctor coat, clearly attempting to reassert his dominant professional power. The absolute terror he had displayed in the delivery room just a few hours prior had completely evaporated, violently replaced by a desperate, highly offensive arrogance. He locked the door behind him with a sharp, loud click and marched straight toward the foot of my bed. "You have absolutely no right to keep the massive secret from me, Violet," he hissed angrily, his dark eyes flashing with a toxic mixture of intense fear and entitled rage. "I saw the distinct birthmark with my own 2 eyes. Do not even attempt to deny it. That child is my biological son. He carries the exact genetic signature of my family. A direct descendant of the wealthy Sterling bloodline absolutely cannot, and will not, be allowed to wander aimlessly outside of our estate like some abandoned, illegitimate stray." He took a highly aggressive step forward, leaning heavily over the metal footboard, completely ignoring my severe physical exhaustion. "I am a highly respected, powerful man in this city. If you think for one single second that you can just disappear into the shadows with my legal heir, you are completely delusional. I will immediately deploy a massive team of the absolute most vicious, expensive corporate lawyers money can buy. I will drag you through the family courts for 20 solid years if I have to. You will surrender my son to me, or I will legally destroy whatever pathetic little life you have managed to build." I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear of intimidation. I did not even raise my tired voice to match his pathetic, aggressive shouting. I calmly reached over to the heavy canvas duffel bag that Clara had carefully placed on the small nightstand. My fingers wrapped firmly around a thick, tightly sealed manila envelope containing the massive cache of explosive evidence my private investigator had compiled. With a sudden, violent flick of my wrist, I threw the heavy envelope directly at his face. The thick packet struck his chest forcefully, bursting entirely open and sending dozens of highly confidential documents, glossy photographs, and detailed financial spreadsheets scattering violently across the cold hospital floor. Arthur stumbled backward in complete surprise, his arrogant rant instantly cutting off. "Pick them up," I commanded loudly, my voice entirely devoid of any human warmth, sounding like 2 heavy pieces of cold steel grinding together. "Pick them up and read them. Dr. Sterling, read exactly what your highly prestigious medical degree and your boundless family wealth actually bought you." Arthur glared at me with deep confusion, but the harsh, absolute authority in my tone forced his body to comply. He slowly bent down, his polished leather shoes crunching against the scattered papers. He picked up the very first document. It was the official, heavily stamped laboratory result from the independent hospital on the exact day of our divorce, officially confirming my perfectly healthy 10-week pregnancy. His eyes darted rapidly across the page, his brow furrowing deeply. Then, his shaking hands reached for the massive stack of highlighted bank statements. He stared blindly at the massive series of financial wire transfers. He saw the exact amount of $250,000 forcefully moving from his own mother's private offshore account directly into the personal trust fund of his highly trusted medical colleague. Finally, he picked up the crystal clear, high-definition photographs, completely exposing Beatrice sliding the heavy envelope of bribe money across the private restaurant table. I watched with absolute, freezing satisfaction as the entire foundation of his reality violently collapsed in real time. The aggressive, arrogant, red color drained entirely from his handsome face, leaving his skin a sickly, terrifying shade of ashen gray. His chest began to heave rapidly, completely unable to draw enough oxygen into his suddenly restricted lungs. He aggressively flipped back and forth between my true medical file and the damning financial evidence, his hands trembling so violently that the crisp papers rattled loudly in the quiet room. The horrifying, undeniable truth smashed directly into his brain. The severe premature ovarian failure was a complete, calculated lie. His wife was never broken. His mother was a cruel, manipulative monster who had deliberately engineered a disgusting medical fraud just to destroy his marriage. And he, the brilliant, highly educated chief resident physician, had been the ultimate, pathetic pawn. He had blindly, foolishly believed the fake diagnosis, without ever once bothering to protect or properly examine the woman he had sworn to fiercely love. The immense, untouchable pride of the prestigious Dr. Arthur Sterling completely disintegrated into fine dust. His weak knees violently buckled beneath his body weight. He collapsed heavily onto the hard linoleum floor. Dropping the explosive documents all around him, he raised his shaking hands to his face, letting out a loud, guttural sob that sounded exactly like a dying animal. The highly respected, arrogant man was completely gone, instantly replaced by a broken, utterly pathetic shell weeping uncontrollably on his knees. "Oh my God!" he choked out, his voice a pathetic, wet whisper. "Violet, I did not know. I swear to you on my life, I had absolutely no idea she did this. She completely destroyed everything. I am so terribly sorry. Please, you have to let me fix this. Please let me be a father to our boy. I will leave her. I will leave the family. Just please, forgive me." He desperately reached out, his trembling fingers trying to grasp the edge of my white hospital blanket, begging pitifully for a single shred of mercy. I looked down at his pathetic, weeping figure with eyes as cold and unforgiving as the frozen blizzard raging outside. "Do not dare touch me," I stated with absolute, lethal precision. "There is absolutely nothing left for you to fix. Arthur, you are weeping because your massive, fragile ego has been utterly shattered, not because you truly loved me when I was drowning in the darkest, most terrifying agony of my life, begging you to help me. You cowardly turned your back. You actively chose to trust a forged piece of paper and your vicious mother over your own wife." I leaned slightly forward, making sure every single syllable pierced directly into his shattered soul. "This beautiful boy is entirely mine. He has absolutely no father. You permanently lost every single right to claim that title 3 years ago when you handed me those divorce papers. So take a very good, long look at the absolute wreckage your pathetic cowardice created. Arthur, because this is the very last time you will ever see our faces." Exactly 3 weeks after the chaotic events inside that freezing hospital room, the Sterling family officially sealed their own spectacular doom. Beatrice Sterling, completely oblivious to the massive legal and media storm gathering directly above her heavily styled head, hosted the most extravagant, highly anticipated charity gala of the decade. The event took place inside the colossal grand ballroom of the most prestigious hotel in downtown Oakhaven. The ostentatious display of stolen wealth was sickening. Thousands of rare white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, and countless crystal chandeliers cast a blinding, arrogant light over the 500 elite guests in attendance. The official purpose of the night was to publicly launch a massive new pediatric health fund, a supposedly noble charity. But the true sinister agenda was the official, highly publicized introduction of Eleanor, the obscenely wealthy pharmaceutical heiress, as Arthur's future bride and the new, pristine face of the sterling legacy. I did not arrive at this glittering event wearing the exhausted, shattered expression of a defeated victim. I arrived looking exactly like the absolute architect of their imminent destruction. I wore a striking, deeply elegant emerald green evening gown that swept powerfully across the polished marble floors. Walking firmly by my right side was the most ruthless, heavily feared family law attorney in the entire state of Oregon. Flanking my left was the most notorious, highly awarded investigative journalist in the region, a man whose highly syndicated newspaper columns had previously destroyed dozens of corrupt politicians. He was holding a small, wireless electronic remote control. His access completely secured by a sympathetic audiovisual technician he had heavily bribed earlier that afternoon. We stood quietly in the dark shadows at the very back of the massive hall, watching the sickening theater unfold. Beatrice stepped gracefully up to the gold-plated podium. Adjusting her heavy diamond necklace, the loud orchestra ceased playing, and the entire room fell into a deeply respectful silence. She smiled her signature, venomous smile, completely masking the dark, rotting core of her soul. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice began, her voice dripping with artificial sugary sweetness, "tonight, we gather to celebrate the profound, absolute sanctity of family. The sterling legacy has always been fiercely dedicated to the protection of innocent children, to nurturing the fragile future of our great society, and tonight, as we launch this pediatric fund, I am also deeply thrilled to welcome a beautiful new daughter into our home. Eleanor will soon marry my brilliant son, Arthur, ensuring that our proud, noble bloodline continues to flourish with absolute perfection." She raised her crystal champagne flute high into the air. The completely oblivious crowd began to politely applaud. I turned my head slightly and gave the journalist a single, sharp nod. He pressed the black button. The massive, high-definition digital projection screen directly behind Beatrice violently flickered. The beautifully curated slideshow of smiling, happy children abruptly vanished. In its place, projected at massive scale for the entire high society to witness, was the official, highly confidential hospital laboratory report from 3 years ago, clearly highlighting my perfectly healthy, completely viable reproductive status, before the confused crowd could even process the complex medical jargon. The screen aggressively shifted. It displayed the heavily detailed, undeniable offshore bank wire transfers, $250,000, moving directly from Beatrice Sterling's private account into the corrupted doctor's hidden trust fund. Finally, the absolute nail in the coffin played in a continuous, silent loop. The crystal-clear security footage of Beatrice sliding the heavy envelope of bribe money across the private restaurant table. Large, bold red text flashed across the screen, explicitly detailing the severe medical fraud and criminal bribery. The luxurious ballroom instantly descended into absolute, unprecedented chaos. 500 wealthy guests gasped in collective, horrified unison. Eleanor dropped her expensive crystal glass, the sharp, shattering sound piercing loudly through the rising murmurs. Beatrice violently spun around, staring at the massive screen behind her, the color completely drained from her heavily powdered face, her mouth opening and closing in pure shock. Down near the side exit doors, the corrupt fertility doctor, who had been arrogantly sipping expensive wine just moments before, suddenly panicked. He dropped his drink and sprinted desperately toward the heavy wooden doors. He did not make it far. 2 incredibly large, heavily muscled men wearing tailored gray suits, who were actually undercover police detectives acting on the mountain of evidence my lawyer had legally submitted days prior, slammed him violently against the mahogany wall. They roughly twisted his arms behind his back, the loud, sharp clicking of heavy steel police handcuffs echoing clearly over the frantic shouting of the crowd. Suddenly, Arthur stepped slowly out of the dark shadows beside the grand stage. He looked absolutely terrible, resembling a hollow, walking ghost. His eyes were deeply sunken, his shoulders heavily slumped in total defeat. He walked past his terrified, trembling mother, completely ignoring her desperate pleas for help. He grabbed the microphone directly from the podium. "Do not look away," Arthur shouted into the microphone, his amplified voice booming loudly over the panicked crowd, forcing everyone into a shocked, heavy silence. "Every single word on that screen is the absolute truth. My mother is a manipulative, cruel criminal. She actively bribed a medical professional to falsely diagnose my first wife with severe infertility, deliberately destroying my marriage purely for financial gain and social power. I was a pathetic, blind coward who enabled her vicious cruelty." Arthur turned his broken, tear-filled eyes toward Eleanor, who was actively backing away from him in pure disgust. "There will be no wedding. Eleanor, the engagement is entirely canceled. Effective immediately, I refuse to let another innocent woman be poisoned by this deeply sick, corrupted family." Finally, he turned entirely away from his mother, publicly and permanently severing his ties to the toxic empire. "I am completely done. I resign from the foundation. I disown you. Mother, you are entirely on your own." Beatrice's legs finally gave out. She collapsed heavily onto the hard wooden stage, her perfectly styled hair completely ruined, screaming loudly in pure, unadulterated hysteria. Her pristine social reputation, the single thing she valued far above human life, was completely publicly slaughtered. She was entirely ruined, facing immediate, severe criminal indictments and the absolute, permanent ostracization from the wealthy elite circle she had so ruthlessly clawed her way to rule. I did not stay to watch the police forcefully drag her away. I did not offer Arthur a single glance of pity. The ultimate, most devastating punishment I could inflict was my complete, absolute indifference, leaving the shattered, burning wreckage of the Sterling family far behind me. I turned around and calmly walked out through the heavy golden doors. I stepped outside into the crisp, beautifully clean night air of the city. A profound, overwhelming sense of peace finally settled deeply into my bones. The dark, heavy chains of the past 3 years were permanently broken. I drove my car quietly back to my secluded, safe cabin. When I walked through the front door, I immediately went to the nursery. I gently picked up my beautiful, sleeping baby boy, holding his warm, tiny body tightly against my chest. As I looked down at his peaceful face, a genuine, radiant smile of absolute, untouchable freedom spread across my own. We were finally safe, and our brand new life was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.